notice the shape of this chart. It's not linear. And then in the 90s, we were getting 18 to 1 to 10 to 1. Still great, but something funky happens to this chart at about 10 to 1. It starts to fall off the side. The Deepwater Horizon was chasing 3 to 1 returns. The oil sands in Canada are somewhere between 5 to 1 to 2 to 1, depending on who's counting. This is where we are in the story right now. And the reason this is important is the green stuff is what we live on. The red stuff is what we have to use to get more energy so we can live on the green stuff. Everything, everybody in this room, myself, everything that we know about, all of our complexity, the tens of thousands of different job classifications, all of the different things you can find in the store, everything we do as a complex, organized society in our economy depends on the green stuff. So, if we were to live entirely on what the Deepwater Horizon could provide, it's beautiful, brilliant technology, and they're doing extraordinary stuff. Tape, however, could use some updating. If we were living on, that other stuff, we'd be living in a very different world. And here's why oil costs more today. When the Ghawar field is in Saudi Arabia, it's brilliant. 180 miles long, 50 miles wide, only 1,000 feet down on land. You just stick a straw on the ground and it comes out under pressure. Brilliant, right? So that was what we used to be doing. And today, when you hear about the Bakken plays, by the way, each one of these Saudi wells might be producing 20, 30,000 barrels per well per day. One straw, 30,000 barrels per day for decades. The Bakken play goes like this. We stick the straw down about 10,000 feet, we turn it sideways for another 15,000 feet, and then we do a 20-stage multi-frac. And at the end of all of that, it'll produce on average about 100 barrels per well per day. So you can get stuff out of that, but guess how many wells you have to start drilling? Lots. And I said an average of 100. The truth is they deliver anywhere from 400 to 1,000 barrels the first month. And then it falls off at about 45% per year. So these wells just decay. Within 3 years, they're stripper wells. 5 years, they're stripper wells, something like that. Meaning that they have to pull the oil out of the ground at great energetic cost. So they don't remotely resemble the oil wells of the past. So that just tells you something about the energy. Why are we getting less energy return? Because the difference between a single straw, 1,000 feet, for 30,000 barrels for decades is very different from a play that basically has a very short life well to it. And then if we're talking the tar sands, you'll hear this all the time. Canada has 2 Saudi Arabias in it. No. They might have that in barrels, but by the time you're power washing sand to get a waxy substance off of it, you are not in the oil business. You're in some other slightly different business, and the environmental costs are beyond extraordinary. This is a measure, if that looks to you like high technology and humans being really clever, it might also look like desperation, depending on how you tilt your head. You squint, work just right, it looks a little desperate. Because it is. This stuff has extraordinarily low energy returns. Would we be doing this if there were lots and lots and lots of high energy return options out there? No. All you need to know is that the companies that spend the tens of billions to do this have evaluated their options very carefully. This is the next lowest hanging fruit on the tree, and it's pretty high up the tree. So the reality is, if we're living in a world of 3 to 1 oil, we live in this one. Where'd all that green go? What goes away when that green goes away? I can't predict that. I can tell you we'll be doing less and fewer things. There'll be extraordinary battles and fights over who's the winner and the loser in that story. But my model for that is from the outside in. You find that when oil energy becomes more expensive, the weaker states end up having the most difficulty first. So that's why Greece and Spain and other places you might see that first, or even in our own country. Look at food stamp use. You could do worse to understand food stamp use than to understand what this chart is telling you. And the worry is, if we tried to live on corn-based ethanol, which has a 1.5 to 1 return, we'd be living in this world. Very different place. It's just not the same. So I'm just saying there's a story of change here, but this form of energy, which I focused on, more so than, say, coal or natural gas, because this is how we move stuff in our complex society. Oil is the lifeblood of any economy. So how are we going to get that economic growth? The quality, then, of oil. The quality. Are we getting 3 to 1, 5 to 1, 10 to 1, 100 to 1? What are we getting? That's the story we should be talking about. If I was to wave a magic policy wand, the Department of Energy would be able to tell us what the energy return on energy invested is for anything we might do. Should we insulate buildings, or should we put the same $1 billion into drilling new wells? I don't know. What's the energy return on energy invested for those two things? We can't answer that, because we don't study it. We don't look at it. But it's actually the most important possible number we could have. So we have this economy that must grow, and is connected to an energy system that reasonably it just can't grow. Not like it used to. That much is absolutely guaranteed. And not just in terms of volume, but especially in terms of total amount of the quality of net energy that's returned. So both those things, think about them. And the environment has a very similar story. And here are these two guys. It's not that long ago because the camera was involved, but this is late 1800s. This is at the beginning of our industrialization of this country. And they were wandering up a stream bed and they found a really nice, well, it's a copper nugget. And we only found one like that. So that's okay. There were lots of other nuggets out there, and we found those. And then those went away, and then we moved on to this beautiful malachite. Look at that 10% band. It's gorgeous stuff. And today, this is the largest mine in the United States, the Bingham Canyon Copper Mine. It's 2.5 miles across and 3/4 of a mile deep. It used to be a mountain. And it has 0.2% copper in it as an ore grade. And we're not doing that to keep the engineers busy and happy. That's what we got left. And this is basically the size of all similar finds of copper now, 0.1, 0.2%. That's what we have left after the first 150 years. What's the next 150 look like? That's great. We'll be down to the 0.5, the 0.25% ore grades, maybe. But there's something here we have to understand, which is that we're not just facing depletion in just one area. We're facing depletion in all kinds of critical minerals right now. So if you don't remember your periodic table, we got strontium and silver and tin and gold and zinc. Was that antimony? Arsenic and all these other things. This is a study by a guy, professor in Italy, who said, hey, if we increase our growth in these extraction of these elements at about 2% a year, which is our last 40 years of history, about 2% more per year. Remember, we're growing this exponentially. How long before known reserves will be fully depleted? And so the answer is everything on this chart. It will be fully depleted within 20 years. 20. That's okay. Maybe we'll figure out how to do without some of these things. We'll substitute. We'll find new reserves. Maybe. But on our watch, the world I am handing off to my youngest, all of my children, is a world that is so completely different from the ones that was handed to me. It's startling. This is a really serious issue. And when we look at this depletion story right here, it's absolutely phenomenally, so companies are already organizing themselves around this. So one of the things that's on here is indium. And when I was talking with a company, Rico, they manufacture toners and other stuff, and I put this chart up and the engineer ran up and he's like, I thought I was the only one in my company with this chart. Because they already organized their entire industrial processes around how they were going to recapture not just indium, but a couple of other very rare things that they saw were going to be running out well within the lifespan of the factories that they have tuned to those processes. So they said, we can't have that. So now they're just recycling as a matter of urgency so that they can recapture the elements from their products because they're worried about where the elements are going to come from. That's fine. It's wonderful a company is worrying about that. But where are we as a species going, hey, wait a minute. What is this telling us? And one of the more important substances out there, this is pretty interesting. This is U.S. phosphate production. Phosphate is one of the 3 critical components of fertilizer, NPK. This is the P. And it's critical because we mine it. We don't make it. Like nitrogen we can make out of the atmosphere if we want to, and we do. Or there's lots and lots of the K, the potash, but potassium, there's nowhere to get it. And it turns out that the United States is well past peak of production here in this country. We consume all of ours, plus we have to import a little bit. 80% of all the phosphate that is left in the world that can be exported comes from one mine in Morocco. And it looks like world phosphate production is due to peak in 2030. If that sounds really far away, some context, my youngest, who's 12 now, if she lives to the same age as my grandfather, she'll die in the year 2094. So within her lifetime, early adult lifetime, we will be running past peak phosphorus in this world. Without phosphorus, food doesn't grow, period. And this is a really gigantic issue. And it's right here, simple math. Total amount of phosphate, total number of people. And by the way, people peak at 2050 at 9 billion or so. So we have this extraordinary collision coming.